Hey everyone, this is Oscar from Underdog, and today the question is, how would you create an enormous splash of energy in your track? Why would you even want an enormous splash of energy? Well, I think that there are two obvious places. One is as a marker at the start of a section of your song. So every 8 bars or every 16 bars or something, it's good to have a splash of energy to boost the energy in your track. The second place might be at a turnaround. So just before restarting a loop, you might splash that energy a little bit before you transition to the next section to create some anticipation. And then a third application could be that once you have a big splash of energy, you can reverse it and create tension building into a transition. So have a sound that starts small and then builds up to create tension for a transition. In my experience, a good splash of energy has 4 ingredients. Let's go through them one by one. First of all, you need a source sound to create the splash, and you need some kind of sample that has a lot of frequencies, especially high mid frequencies, so it sounds bright when you create this splash. 3 examples that could work very well would be a clap sound, a cymbal crash, or a slice of vocal sound. Now to turn this dry sound into a splash, the second step is to add a huge reverb to it. So we're talking about an unrealistic amount of reverb. We're talking about 5 to 10 to 15 seconds or more of reverb tail. So use whatever reverb effect that you like. Just make sure that the decay time is really long, but the dry wet is set to relatively wet. So we're talking almost like 50%, can even be 100%. Honestly, we're not going for realism here. So once you've got a reverb tail like this, what you'll see is that it starts really loud and then it tails off over time, right? The volume goes from very loud to very quiet. And in a lot of dance music, you're working with quite compressed sounds. So maybe you want to control the dynamic range of this effect. That just means controlling when it's loud and when it's quiet, because you can control that. The plugin doesn't have to dictate that, right? Now, your main tool for controlling the dynamic range is anything that can do compression or limiting. You could slam this whole thing through a limiter, which is going to take the loudest parts and bring them down to be at the same volume as the quiet parts, and then you can turn up the entire signal so that the whole thing is at the same volume level. But personally, I like to use the brute force technique that is the OTT, which exists natively in Ableton or as a VST. I'm going to use the VST right now. The idea of the OTT is that it squishes your dynamic range heavily. So whenever the signal tries to get too loud, it gets pulled back. And whenever the signal tries to get too quiet, it gets boosted up. So the volume of your signal will always sit at a particular decibel level, no matter how loud or quiet it tries to get. When it tries to get too loud, it does something called downward compression. And when it tries to get too quiet, it does something called upward compression. Either way, it's called compression because you're compressing the dynamic range. The cool thing about OTT is that it does it in different bands as well. So you've got a mid band and a high band, and you can use it as a very rough tonal balance tool to bring up the extra high end to make your crash even fresher. You're almost using it as a very kind of brute force EQ. You hear how the volume barely tails off over time? It still has movement in it. It still evolves, but you can hear it for a much longer time. And now that you've got this element at a static volume, what you add is either sidechain compression to your kick or something called LFO tool, which just adds back in that gentle pump, so it's going to pump along with the rhythm of your track. And there you have it. Those are 4 steps to create a huge splash of energy. You need a bright sound, a huge reverb, you need to squish the dynamic range with an OTT, and then you need to make it groove with your track with an LFO tool. As a bonus tip, if you leave off the LFO tool and you just bounce this splash to audio, right, you can reverse it and create a riser with it. In which case you can also use the LFO tool, but in this case use it as a tremolator. It's like an LFO that controls the volume, but you can unlink it to the grid and then automate the speed at which it rotates so that you can have this speeding up vibe as you're moving into a transition. This is a great way of building up tension towards a release, which is a skill that you need to have as a producer no matter what your genre. Remember that all of this processing may have created a sound that is a bit too big and that has a bit too many frequencies, so feel free to slap on an equalizer after that, clean up the low frequencies, and maybe see if you need to boost or cut some frequencies to make it slot in with the rest of your elements a bit smoother. Now, it might be obvious to you that this is just one tool that you need to have in your toolbox, but what if you're a beginner and these kind of individual tools don't really satisfy you because you still feel like you don't really see the big picture? So I created a course for absolute beginners like this, which I call the Foundations of Electronic Music, and it assumes no previous knowledge and no skills whatsoever. It takes you from the absolute basics of of using your DAW, in this case Ableton, all the way up to becoming intermediate level producer. So it shows you in a structured way how to do things one by one. If you find this kind of stuff helpful, leave a comment below to show me some love, like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, come show us on the Discord channel what you did with this, and until next time, stay producing, be good to one another, and take care. Bye bye.